On October 12, 1972, the Old Christians rugby team from Stella Maris College in Montevideo, Uruguay, set off for a match in Santiago, Chile. The Uruguayan Air Force Fairchild FH-227D aircraft carrying 45 passengers and crew departed from Carrasco International Airport. This journey, cutting through the Andes Mountains in South America, would transform into one of the most dramatic and horrifying survival stories in human history. The initial plan was to spend the night in Mendoza, Argentina, due to stormy mountain weather. On Friday, October 13th, the plane took off again for Santiago, now following its route over the Andes, gliding through mountain passes towards its destination. However, things weren't as they should be. The plane was above a thick cloud layer, and the pilots had no visual reference to what was below. A small miscalculation could prove fatal, and it did. The pilots preparing to initiate descent for Santiago mistakenly reported to air traffic controllers that they were over the city of Curicó in Chile and received permission to descend. But at that moment, they were still over the steep peaks of the Andes. This grave error resulted in the plane crashing into an unnamed peak. This summit, later to be known as Glacier of Tears, became the site of a disaster. Of the 45 people on board, 12 died instantly in the crash. 5 more succumbed to their injuries the following morning, and 1 more perished on the 8th day, unable to withstand the harsh weather and severe wounds. The remaining 27 faced freezing temperatures and starvation. This region, at an altitude of 3,200 meters, was a desolate place with nothing but rock and snow. The limited food supplies on the plane quickly ran out. They even tried to eat the leather from suitcases and the foam from seats, but to no avail. There was no vegetation or animals in the snow-covered mountainous terrain. Search teams from Chile, Argentina, and Uruguay began looking for the missing plane. However, being white, the aircraft was invisible against the snow from the sky. On the 8th day, all 3 countries halted their search efforts. The survivors, hearing this news on the plane's only working radio, fell into deep despair. Their only hope of salvation lay in their own efforts. The harsh living conditions became increasingly impossible each day. On the night of October 29th, 16 days after the crash, an avalanche hit the plane's wreckage while they slept, killing 8 more people. In the following days, 3 more would die from cold and hunger. There were no doctors among them, nor did they possess any necessary equipment for the conditions. 2 medical students, Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Nikolic, could only manage fractures with makeshift tools from the wreckage. They faced a difficult decision for survival. Starvation had become so severe that they either had to eat the bodies of their deceased friends to stay alive or die of hunger in the freezing cold. Although initially hesitant, they realized there was no other way to survive, and within a few days desperately changed their minds, deciding to consume their dead friends. This was not an easy decision, as many of the deceased were their classmates and close friends. Roberto Canessa described these agonizing moments by saying, "I will never forget that first cut, 9 days after the crash. This was our farewell to innocence." Nando Parrado summarized those moments by stating, "We were dying of hunger, and there was no hope of finding food." Despite the news that search efforts had ended, they continued to wait for help, eating the flesh of their deceased friends for a long time. Days followed one another in desperation, filled with feelings of guilt and remorse. Then, as weather conditions improved after approximately 2 months, they realized that their only way out was to cross the mountains to the west. On December 12th, 3 of the most resilient survivors were chosen: Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vicentin. They prepared provisions from the bodies of their deceased friends and began their climb. After a 3-day ascent, Vicentin's supplies ran out, and it was decided that he should return to the crash site. Parado and Canessa continued their trek. On the 9th night, resting by a river, they noticed a figure on horseback on the opposite bank. At first, they thought they were hallucinating, but eventually they saw 3 villagers on horseback. Despite the river between them, they tried to explain their situation to the villagers. The villagers then rode a long way to seek help. The next day, on December 22nd, Chilean Air Force helicopters sent to the region evacuated half of the survivors from the crash site. By December 23, 1972, exactly 72 days later, all survivors had been rescued. The survivors were taken to hospitals in Santiago for treatment for frostbite, broken bones, and malnutrition. Although they initially claimed to have survived by eating food found in the plane wreckage, the truth emerged when photographs of the dismembered bodies at the crash site were leaked to the press. This incident, which caused a huge public outcry, sparked debates about cannibalism. The Catholic Church issued a statement clarifying that the survivors acted out of necessity. The families of the deceased also publicly expressed their support for the survivors, stating that they understood and accepted what they had done to survive. The remains of the deceased were buried under a cairn half a mile from the crash site, and an iron cross was erected in the centre of the grave. The remaining parts of the plane's fuselage were burned to prevent them from attracting curious onlookers. This event became a story that pushed the limits of what is possible for survival, revealing desperation, struggle, and the depths of human nature. This true story from 1972 has been the subject of many films and books. Nando Parado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin, among others, wrote books about their horrific experiences and gave motivational speeches. Most recently, the Netflix film Society of the Snow depicted this tragic event in all its stark reality.